What's up, Raiders? Today we are going to talk about how to take down the Forgotten Experiments boss in Aberrus, the Shadow Crucible, the brand new raid in World of Warcraft Dragonflight 10.1. This is a 3-phase boss, with each phase being represented by a different Dracthyr. As you take each one down, a new one comes out and adds new abilities to the fight. So each of these bosses has the same tank buster mechanic. This is a stacking debuff called Infused Strikes, which applies every time they take a melee hit. This debuff does not have a duration, it just continues to stack up. Once the levels are a little bit too high on one tank, the other tank will take over and begin to gain stacks. When you feel it is acceptable for the raid to take a burst of damage, the two tanks can touch each other. When they do, it will unleash a big dot on the entire raid that will start ticking away. This is a stacking dot, and so if you clear too many times, you're going to stack this up and the raid's just going to take way too much damage. So you need to be constantly watching the levels and making sure that it falls off of the raid before the tanks touch again. You don't want to get to 2 or 3 stacks of this debuff. I'd recommend the taunt swap happening at about 5 stacks per tank, and then once both tanks have 5, they do the touch and get the debuff out. So the first boss is Neldris, and he's got 3 abilities. First up is this Bellowing Roar. That's a channeling area of effect. The further are you away from him, the less damage you take when it goes off. Massive Slam targets a random player and begins channeling in that direction. After a moment, a big slam will hit. Everybody just needs to get out of the cone. Rending Charge is his biggest ability. He's going to mark 3 different players in the raid with a red arrow, and then after a delay, he'll charge to them one after another. Each player that he goes through while charging to a player gets a bleed debuff on them, so you need to make sure that he doesn't go through any players or goes through as few players as possible as he's dashing around. To handle this, I'd recommend a marking system to say the players that get the arrows go and stand in this location and no one else should ever be there. So I put down this moon marker, and that's where the raid is supposed to go when they get the arrows on their head, and then they can line up a nice little triangle where nobody gets affected. This boss is a pretty easy win. When he goes down, Thadrian comes out. This is actually the phase that you want to use your Lust on, because this is actually a very annoying phase that makes the end phase a lot more difficult the longer you're in this one. So you're going to Lust up or Time Warp, and you're going to burn this guy down. Tanks still need to deal with that same Tank Buster, and he has 3 other abilities. Volatile Spew puts these swirls all around the room. You need to avoid the swirls to avoid taking damage. Unstable Essence is a stacking debuff that goes on a target. It stacks indefinitely until it is dispelled. In Heroic, upon dispelling, a erratic Revenant is going to show up on the ground there and needs to be DPS down. This thing is going to channel and do a pulse of damage around the group. As you don't want too many of these orbs out throughout the fight, you need to limit your dispels down to only when you feel the players with the stacking debuff are taking too much damage. This is the main effect that you got to deal with throughout this phase. You want to deal with this debuff as little as possible. Violent Eruption is a channel the boss does that does constant damage to the raid. It also causes all of the existing erratic remnants to pulse if you're on heroic mode for even more damage. Do not dispel any targets if Violent Eruption is going to go off in the next 10-ish seconds. You want to make sure none of these little erratic remnants exist when he begins that channel, or it's going to be a lot of healing for your healers. The debuff that he puts out on people does not go away, so the faster you kill him, the less of these debuffs you have to deal with. Every time it's dispelled, it just jumps to a new person, and you're going to have to be constantly dealing with these charges throughout the fight. That's really why you want to burn that guy quickly. You don't want 3 or 4 of this debuff on your raid, you want 1 or 2. So when he goes down, the last boss is still going to have the same tank buster, and you're still going to be dealing with those dispels. So that's the really annoying part of this boss. The third boss has 2 effects from the first couple, and then he has his own set of abilities. When Rionthus comes down, you gotta deal with the hardest phase of the fight. First up, his ability is Disintegrate. He'll channel into multiple players, and then after a delay, they'll pulse with a circle around each of them. You just need to spread out everybody they got channeled into, and then stay out of their circles. The boss is going to summon little temporal anomalies that are going to float towards him. If they ever touch him, they give him a big shield. So you need to put your back to these and bounce them away from the boss. If they touch a player instead of the boss, they're going to get bounced away. This will deal a non-insignificant amount of damage to the person that did buff it away, so you don't want to buff away too many with the same person, but you definitely need to make sure they never touch him, because that is a massive shield that he gains. The last ability we saw a glimpse of, but this is Deep Breath. He's going to jump to one side of the room, and then he will channel a deep breath as he kites throughout that section of the room. You need to go into one of the 1/3 sections that he's not currently in. As he deep breaths across, he will then jump to a new location on the opposite side and deep breath across again. This is just a massive amount of damage that you have to be paying attention to while you're constantly going around and trying to take out these erratic charges, stopping him from gaining temporal anomalies. There's lots going on in this fight, which is what makes it really rough at the end. At the end of the fight, don't forget to still pay attention to those temporal anomalies. You can get a last-second wipe if you don't stop one of those, and he ends up getting the orb. I hope this guide helped your group figure out how to take down the Forgotten Experiments, the third boss in Aberrus, the Shadow Crucible.